Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, getting ready to go over the DraftKings main slate for Week 16. The goal is to help you win, hopefully point you to some plays that maybe you were not on, or maybe, you know, validate the ones that you already were. Either way, smash that like button before we get started here. If you like free advice, if you like breakdowns of NFL slates or just all DFS slates in general, this is the channel for you. Already pushed up a Saturday two-gamer breakdown for the two-game NFL Saturday slate, and we do NBA video slates for every NBA slate we can. We already did one for today, so it's only three gamers, so it's a little bit light. Had a good day yesterday for myself in the NBA slate. Hopefully you joined along. If not, what are you waiting for? This is free advice. Myself and Taylor Smith get together whenever we can, and I go solo as needed. And here we are doing just that for the Week 16 main slate. What I'm going to do here is go over each position, highlight my favorite plays, look at projections, matchups, ownership, anything that really is going to be a key factor in what you want to do, whether you hand build, whether you do single entry, whether you do mass entry, or you're using an optimizer or not. Hopefully, I can provide a little bit of value. All right, so at quarterback up top is Josh Allen with the best projection of the slate. That should shock nobody. His price is an astronomical 8.7K. In my opinion, he's like basically the Russell Westbrook of NFL DFS at this point. Russell Westbrook of years ago when he was averaging a triple double and he was getting like 90 fantasy points every game. It's very possible that's what he is. So it's certainly tempting to just go get those raw points from a guy who has put up literally 99 fantasy points over his last two games, 44 and 54 over the past 2 weeks. The only thing is, I don't know how sustainable that really is. I will say this Bills offense is humming. They've scored 30 plus points in every game since week 7, 40 plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. But we need to consider they were facing a very good Lions team on the road, so they had to keep scoring to keep the Lions at bay. And then against the Rams, they were losing the whole game, and the Rams kept putting up points, so they had to keep scoring to keep up there. So against the Patriots team that they'll probably dominate and not really have to go and put up as many points, is it possible we're in for a letdown here? I think it is. I just don't think the Patriots are going to put up enough of a fight to give us the same game environment that we, were enjoying so much the past 2 weeks. Josh Allen's crazy expensive. I don't think I'm going to have a ton of exposure to him. I guess the upside with him is you probably just have in a really nice baked in, floor and ceiling. Like you don't really need to worry that much about him, but he also needs to get a shit ton of points for it to work out at 8.7K. The other issue is correlation. Like I don't feel great about trying to go pay almost 9K for a guy and then just guessing who's going to be his dude, like who he's going to go to all the time. He could go to either tight end. He could go to his running backs. I mean, he went to Ty Johnson for 5 catches and like 100 yards last week. Amari Cooper played 46% of snaps and didn't have a single catch. So it's a tough one for sure. I'm not going to tell you not to play Josh Allen, but I personally will look for other ways, to spend my money on this slate. Just because I just think it works out. There's too many good values at the slate that I think have a really good chance of hitting. So if they do, and then you can afford these other studs at other positions and those guys end up hitting, I just don't know if Josh Allen is going to be a very optimal play. Right away, if you want to drop down, even save $1,000 here, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, those guys are in the next range of prices. They all look really good. Like there's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. They're all coming in with a projection over 20 fantasy points. Just like Josh Allen, they're not going to be very owned. Jaden Daniels especially is going to be the least owned of those top 4 projecting quarterbacks. He's also the cheapest. I think he's going to be my favorite. He's in a game with the Eagles. The Eagles have been a pretty palatable matchup for quarterbacks on the year, I believe. In the last 4 weeks, it hasn't really been the case, but actually, no, they haven't. I thought they were. Maybe they got better over the course of the year. I know earlier in the year they definitely were. I know Jordan Love had success against them. A couple other quarterbacks definitely had big games against the Eagles, but certainly they have adjusted. So to be fair, it's not the most appealing matchup by the numbers, but it's a massive divisional game. And Jaden Daniels has just been a machine himself. So it's more like a Jaden Daniels play than anything else, just because he's been crushing 23 plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games, averaging 21 fantasy points on the year. So I don't really love the matchup by the numbers, and obviously the price is the price. But I think if you're going to pay all the way up, I would rather just save 1.4K and use Jaden Daniels instead of using any of these other guys. Joe Burrow has been crushing every single slate. He's still in play, but Myles Garrett is in for the Browns. And also the Browns on offense, they switched, benched Jameis Winston and went with Dorial, what's his name? Dorial Thompson Robinson. So it is very possible they could end up being a much more run-heavy offense. If they want to keep the game close, that's probably a wise choice. So if those two things are to be believed, then Joe Burrow might not possess the ceiling that we actually want and need at that price range. Anyways, long story short, if I'm going to pay up at quarterback this week, I think it's going to be Jaden Daniels. And if you don't want to do Jaden Daniels, maybe I guess go all the way up for Josh Allen. I'm just not going to do that because there's so much value here. Number one, Anthony Richardson. He is part of the 5-pack of guys who are coming in with a 20-plus point fantasy projection at the position. He looks awesome here against the Titans. The Titans were a stingy pass defense earlier in the year. That has changed quite a bit. They are giving up production to teams actually now. So also just the fact that we know Anthony Richardson has the built-in rushing floor. He's had some tough matchups where he wasn't even necessarily, crushing, but he was still getting there. Like last week against the Broncos, good defense, 16 fantasy points. 2 weeks ago against the Patriots on the road, 23 fantasy points. 4 weeks ago against the Jets, 29 fantasy points. So Anthony Richardson is not an accurate passer. He has been very inconsistent. He certainly exhibited a low floor on the year, but the Titans present a solid matchup. We know he has immense upside, and he's only 5.4K. So he's one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. He's definitely one of my favorite plays at quarterback. And I just think in general, I want to save here. Aiden O'Connell is popping. I prefer Anthony Richardson for sure. Anthony Richardson is looking to be the chalkiest quarterback on the slate based off of everything I already just said. So I guess you could consider pivoting to Aiden O'Connell. He gets the Jaguars, who have been one of the better matchups for quarterbacks all year long. But I just don't trust him quite as much as I do Anthony Richardson, which sounds weird, but it's true. Also a really good price, only $600 more than Anthony Richardson is Kyler Murray. He's certainly been also inconsistent. In really nice smash spots, he has failed us. He had 2 games against the Seahawks where he looked pretty good, like he was going to be a good play. First game, 11 fantasy points. Second game, 19. Last week against the Patriots, he looked good, 10 fantasy points. So he does have a pretty weak floor for sure, but we know he has rushing upside, and we know he has the weapons to get it done. And at only 6.1K for a guy averaging almost 18 fantasy points per game on the year, I think that's a pretty good price. And then also the Panthers are just a friendly matchup in general. So over the last 4 weeks, they are bottom 5 against fantasy quarterbacks, and they've given up a lot of rushing production too. So I think across the board, Kyler Murray looks like a really good play, right up there with Anthony Richardson. He's not carrying as much ownership as Anthony Richardson, so I certainly wouldn't mind leaning his way more in tournaments if you feel so inclined. The best value at quarterback, though, is going to be Michael Penix Jr. He's replacing Kirk Cousins. He'll be facing the Giants, who we know can be had. They have been a bottom 10 defense against fantasy quarterbacks over the last 10 weeks. 7 touchdowns allowed through the air, just 1 interception. So it's just not a scary spot at all for his NFL debut. And he's got Drake London. He's got Bijan Robinson. He's got Darnell Mooney. Just like so many stacking options for him. Maybe Kyle Pitts can wake up a little bit here. Thing is, Penix is a little bit more mobile anyways than Kirk Cousins. And he's got a big arm. So I just think all the areas where Kirk Cousins has faltered and failed this year, I think Penix can potentially give them the upgrade that they are seeking. But it doesn't really matter because at 4.5K, come in with a 17-point fantasy projection, that is a slam dunk. So Penix is coming in at 8.5% ownership. That's going to be less than Anthony Richardson. And $1,000 cheaper, he looks like the play at the position. There are some other guys that aren't really projecting as well as I would think they would, and they look pretty interesting. Caleb Williams against the pass funnel Lions defense, 5.5K. He certainly has had a floor on the year, but if people are going to overlook Caleb Williams, I'm interested. He had 26 and 29 fantasy points against the Lions and Vikings. Obviously, having success in this exact matchup is nice. Struggled quite a bit last week and the week before on the road against the Vikings and 49ers, but this could be a little bounce back game. Bears do have weapons, in the air, and the Lions dare you to beat them, with throwing. So Caleb Williams at 5.5K, I think that is all right. I don't mind him whatsoever. Aaron Rodgers, does it feel good? No, but he's only 5.6K, and he seems to have come alive lately. At 41 years old, who would have thought? But 20 and 30 fantasy points in his last two games. Him and Devontae Adams are really, really feeling it. And the Rams are a positive matchup for fantasy purposes. We saw Josh Allen go bonkers against them just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, Rodgers is not Josh Allen, but hey, over the last 4 weeks, the Rams are third to last. Bottom three defense against fantasy quarterbacks. So Aaron Rodgers is definitely in play at 5.6. And even Dorial Thompson-Robinson. Yes, I don't really want to play into this because he's not better than Jameis Winston, and even Jameis Winston struggled. But he does have rushing upside. He was a talented guy who put up numbers in college. And he's facing the Bengals, who have been absolutely horrific all year long. They've been a little bit better as of late, but on the season, they are third worst against fantasy quarterbacks. So their defense just keeps giving up production left and right. I think I certainly want to attack the Bengals defense in one way or another. I don't know how much stock I want to put in their more expensive options, but at 4.8K, I do not mind having DTR as part of my quarterback player pool at all. I don't really think anybody else really calls to me at this point. I'm looking at cheap guys at quarterback. I'm looking to save here. I want to tighten my player pool if I can. I'm looking at Anthony Richardson. Kyler Murray might be as high as I want to go as far as spending. And then Penix, Caleb, Aaron Rodgers, and DTR. That's kind of where my quarterback player pool is. Obviously, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Jay Daniels all are way safer, but they're also very expensive, and I don't really want to pay that much cash at quarterback this week when there's so many guys. You only need one or two of them to hit to really maximize your lineups. So that's where I'm at. Moving over to running back, Jahmyr Gibbs looks amazing at 7.5. Best projection, and I believe he's going to be highest owned too. Yep, of course. Why wouldn't he be? Explosive, dynamic running back going up against the Bears, who can definitely be had on the ground. The Bears are bottom 5 against running backs on the year, and that has been the case the last 4 weeks as well. So there's just literally no reason not to fall in love with Jahmyr Gibbs. He had 28 fantasy points last week. He's had 19 plus in 4 of his last 5 games, and now he has backfield theoretically all to himself with David Montgomery banged up. So, the Lions could still do a 2-headed horse and rotate in Craig Reynolds or something. But I just feel like this is going to be the Jahmyr Gibbs show in a smash spot. The Lions lost last week. They're going to want to bounce back. So I would imagine they end up teeing off on the Bears in this one. And I think Gibbs is going to be a big part of that. So this is chalk I do not mind eating because all those reasons, but also he's not expensive. This feels like Alvin Kamara, those weeks where he was like 8K. And we're like, oh, I don't really want to pay 8K for Alvin Kamara. And I didn't want to in those instances because I think there was logic to not do it. But I don't think there's any logic to not do it here. The only reason you wouldn't play Gibbs on this slate is because of the ownership, but I don't even care about that. A little bit more expensive than him is Chase Brown. I might be out on Chase Brown at this price. Number one, because I'm already paying for Jahmyr Gibbs there, and he's $200 cheaper. But also because there are other options on this slate, and I can probably I can gain a little bit of leverage there. If Chase Brown's going to be 20% or more owned, I can just either punt the second running back spot, or I can make a pivot and you get somebody who's going to be, comparable, but potentially less owned. Not that Chase Brown is a bad play in a vacuum. Chase Brown's been crushing it. There's no getting around that. Chase Brown has had 23 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games and 19 plus fantasy points in each of those games. Massive ceiling. Terrific floor. There's absolutely nothing wrong with him at all. The Browns, in theory, are not that good of a matchup, but they have given up production lately, and they're kind of splitting apart at the seams here. They're benching Winston and just completely throwing the season down the drain. I mean, the season's over anyways, but they're just not even really trying to compete if you're benching Winston for this guy at this point. So I do have my concerns that he won't really be needed that much, but the matchup's good. I don't have a problem with him. I just think if you're going to pay up, I would rather go Jahmyr Gibbs and eat that chalk and then maybe get different with Bijan Robinson. Bijan has just been super, super safe as well. He's just only a little bit more expensive. And he also is facing the Giants, who are second worst against running backs over the last 4 weeks. And they've been bottom 5 against running backs all year long. So I just think it's pretty simple. They both look really good. They both have good matchups. They're both really expensive. Why not pay $400 more for the guy who's going to be less owned? Just gain a little bit of an edge while getting a really good play at the same time. So if you're going to pay at 2 spots, that is what I think is most appealing. There's also Saquon Barkley there at 8.3, but why do that when there's Bijan right there? I guess the only real reason was you could go even further with that leverage idea and go get Saquon, who's going to be sub 10% owned. Against the Commanders, not really that excited about that. Over the last 4 weeks, they've been second worst as far as matchup against running backs. Not that I think anybody's like a lock to shut Saquon down at any given moment. He's basically been matchup proof for much of the year. So if for tournaments, I think he's in play. I think I just prefer Bijan if I'm going to go that route. But honestly, the second running back slot, I think we can pay down. There's a lot of good options, a lot of good value. You can stop at Chuba Hubbard for sure. He comes in with a 20-point fantasy projection, and he's like the 5th best guy here for projection-wise, and he faces the Cardinals. The Cardinals have not been a super friendly matchup overall. I mean, their defense has been a little bit better than expected. But on the year, they are bottom 10 defense against running backs. So based off of role and price and projection, Hubbard looks good again. He definitely burned us last week as chalk, but he's not that chalky this time at only 15%. So I'm not going to let that scare me away. Definitely will like him quite a bit as my RB2. Going down here, Achane, Kyren Williams, in terms of role and upside, they are certainly in play. I just don't really trust Kyren Williams. He's not really getting in the end zone as much. And Achane, like the Miami offense is just kind of, the 49ers and Jets are not really easy matchups technically. So again, if I'm going to be paying all the way up, why not just go up for a higher upside, safer guy like Bijan? That's probably where I'm at when it comes to that. I think Jonathan Taylor is an interesting play at 6.9K against the Titans as a leverage on the Anthony Richardson ownership. I don't really like to play them together, but if you think Richardson's going to be over-owned and you don't want to play Richardson, I think Jonathan Taylor is pretty interesting. Definitely a good price for a guy that does have a ceiling. He's kind of gotten it together a little bit the last couple of weeks, 17 and 14 fantasy points. It's been a down year for him overall for sure. But the Titans, on the season have been a softer matchup for running backs. I still do think I prefer Anthony Richardson instead of using that strategy, but you could do that if you wanted to. Let's see what else here. Tony Pollard might miss. So Tyjae Spears all the way down here. Where is he? Right up here. 4.9K Tyjae Spears against the Colts. I don't hate it. The Colts on the year are a bottom 10 defense against fantasy running backs, and they're bottom 5 over the last 4 weeks. So Tyjae is an explosive, dynamic runner. If Pollard is out, there's a good chance he is featured, and he could thrive here for sure. You would not know he's a good play based off of his projection yet because Pollard has not been officially ruled out. So just keep an eye on that. Another guy to mention, Patrick Taylor. I don't really love the price at 5.2K, but Isaac Guerrero is not going to play. So he's taking on the Dolphins. The Dolphins are kind of just a middle of the road matchup lately and on the year. So I just think it's, trust in the 49ers system, trust in the fact that he's cheap and the fact that he is probably going to have a role. So far, there's nothing the 49ers have done with running backs that should tell us otherwise. Basically, if somebody gets hurt, whoever the next guy is, they get fed like crazy. It went from McCaffrey to, Elijah Mitchell or to Jordan Mason and then to Guerrero. Like whoever is there is going to get like 20 touches as long as the game is close. So I don't really believe in Patrick Taylor's talent at a high level, but the projection is okay enough for me to take a shot there. That said, I think I prefer Jerome Ford. No Nick Chubb. He's on IR. The Bengals are a dream matchup. I think Jerome Ford is really, really interesting. And right now, not getting owned enough. DeAndre Swift at 5.6K, same price. He's kind of interesting based off of, the fact that he's, facing the Lions again. It's revenge narrative. And he is an explosive, dynamic player. I don't really trust him, though, because the Lions' run defense has been good on the year. And the Bears are probably going to fall behind here. So unless you believe he's going to be super involved as a receiver out of the backfield, then he becomes a bit of a dicey play. And honestly, like the last 2 weeks, he's had 3 targets and 2 catches. So that's not something we can really hang our hat on. He hasn't even top 10 fantasy points in the last 4 games either. So I think the revenge narrative thing is something to consider when somebody's that cheap and has a nice role, but I think I prefer Jerome Ford there. I think there's one other guy that I don't want to forget. There's definitely one other guy. Maybe I was only thinking of Patrick Taylor there. No, I think that's it. I think that does it for running back. So I'm definitely paying up at one running back spot, and that's just going to be eating the chalk with Gibbs. And then the second spot, you certainly can play Chase Brown if you don't mind going double chalky at the both running back spots. I just feel like it's getting a little bit high for Chase Brown. So I think I would rather go to Bijan or Barkley there if I'm going to spend up. I think Hubbard, though, feels like a really, really good play again. Let's hope he doesn't burn us. I will definitely have a lot of lineups where it's Gibbs and Hubbard together. It just feels like a match made in heaven. And then I also will have quite a few lineups where I eat the Gibbs chalk and then drop down to Jerome Ford, Patrick Taylor, and potentially Tyjae Spears if he is indeed getting a big role. All right, I think that does it for running back. On to wide receiver we go. There are quite a few studs we can pay up for here. We got Puka Nacua at AK flat against the Jets. They have been getting absolutely annihilated by passing offenses lately. Earlier in the year, the Jets were very, very stingy against the pass. Not so much the last 4 weeks here. They rank fifth worst in terms of giving up fantasy production to wide receivers. So Puka looks great. Cooper Kupp at 6.5 or 6.4? Where is he in here? Oh man, they hate his projection. Okay, so 6.5. I mean, Puka is certainly safer and has the higher ceiling because Kupp did nothing in his last game. I do tend to like the idea of unowned Cooper Kupp, though, getting a bounce back. So to be fair, his role has been going down for sure the last few weeks. 6, 8, and 3 targets, 3, 5, and 0 catches. There's no denying that. So Puka has definitely been the alpha in this offense lately. So I don't mind going to Puka whatsoever, given how bad the Jets have been at containing wide receivers. And he's been really good. 17 plus fantasy points in each of his last 5 games. He's averaging 20 fantasy points per game on the year. Certainly displays a ceiling with, he has 1 game with over 40 fantasy points, but still, 1 is enough to get me interested, right? So he looks like a pretty darn good pivot up top away from Chase and Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown and A.J. Brown. Where's A.J. Brown on this thing? Is he? Let me double check A.J. Brown's status. Actually, no, he is nicked up. He said he'll play. He's got a knee issue, but he said he'll play. So he's 7.8K as well. So there are a lot of expensive wide receivers worth paying up for right now. If I'm not going to be playing Cooper Kupp, I do like Puka as my number 1 wide receiver. It's certainly hard to hate Jamar Chase. Got no problem with that. Justin Jefferson as an unowned stud option. Only 10% ownership compared to these other guys. That is certainly appealing. He's been kicking it back into high gear. Anytime Justin Jefferson's going to get overlooked, by the way, he's had 16 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, 35 2 weeks ago. The Seahawks are a little bit better defensively than people give them credit for. But if Jefferson's going to be completely overlooked, he is very, very interesting as a top stud to pay for. But all those guys are in play. I have no problem getting to any of them. If I had to pick one to build my lineups around, it's going to be Puka right now. But I do think Cooper Kupp in lineups where I don't have Puka is a really interesting leverage play in tourneys. Jacoby Myers, the price is really nice at 5.8K. He's got a top 5 fantasy projection on the week. The Jaguars have a very good matchup for passing games. So I don't want to really stack with Aiden O'Connell necessarily, but I do like Jacoby Myers here at this price in this matchup. He looks like a really, really good play. Brian Thomas Jr., can he keep it going? He went bananas last week. I think he had like 30 fantasy points, something crazy. Yeah, 35. He went nuts. And he'll be facing the Raiders, who another defense that's a little bit better than people think. But he's been very, very steady. 10 plus targets in 3 straight games, 16 plus fantasy points in all those games. So no reason to expect him to not be force-fed the ball. And the reality is, given his projection and his talent level and the role he has, 6.3K is too cheap. So I like him a lot as well. Malik Neighbors at 6.1 is a nice little pivot there. Slightly less owned, just as explosive. I think he's getting the ball just as much. Like, he's been quite involved for the Giants. Yeah, 10 plus targets in each of his last 3 games, 14 plus fantasy points in each of those games, and 24 fantasy points last week. So super involved, super explosive, really nice price, and he has a way better matchup against the Falcons. It's going to be awfully hard to not just load up lineups with like Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., both of them. But if I had to pick one of them, I think I do actually lean towards Neighbors because the matchup with Atlanta is really, really nice. And he's a little bit less owned, which is a little bit surprising and also really nice. So kind of in that same price range, you have Drake London at 6.4K. Nice matchup against the Giants. Good projection. A little bit interesting to see what happens with Michael Penix. But since Michael Penix looks like such a good quarterback value and such good chalk to eat, like of course we're gonna want to pair him with Drake London, right? So London looks really good. Whether you like Penix or not, Drake London continues to be too cheap. Like he was getting it done even with a gimpy, ineffective Kirk Cousins out there. Like Kirk Cousins has been bad, like straight up bad. And Drake has still had 12 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last five games. So like he's still been producing pretty decently despite having just ass back there. So if Penix is an upgrade, London might smash. Unknown to AJ Brown against the Commanders, who have been bad against passing games all year. I mean, I don't hate it, but he's not healthy, so I don't really want to pay for him. Juwan Jennings, I guess, will be really involved. So in theory, he's a good value. I just don't really want to play him against Miami necessarily. Devontae Adams, I mean, why not keep going back to the well here? The dude is ageless, apparently. 198 yards last week, 2 touchdowns. Absolutely smashed. If you didn't have him in your lineup, you were screwed. The Rams are a good matchup. His role is amazing. They're probably going to be trailing. They'll have to throw a lot. There's nothing to hate about Devontae Adams whatsoever. DK Metcalf is a little sneaky. JSN is in there too. He's a little bit more expensive at 6K. I guess he's a safer play. And DK has not been good. I will say that for sure. But Minnesota is a pass funnel defense. I think Seahawks passing game stacks are a little bit interesting here because the Vikings stop to run and they make you throw. So if the Seahawks can find success through the air, DK at 5.5 is very, very interesting for sure. I mentioned Caleb Williams is a solid option against a pass funnel Lions offense. So DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, maybe even a little bit of Roma Dunze. Those guys all look good. All good prices too. And trying to look at anybody else that might like if you stacking out Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit too cheap, 5.4K against the Panthers with Kyler Murray as a stacking option. Not a priority for me by any means, just because he hasn't been very good. But certainly a good guy to complete that stack with. Certainly too cheap for his talent and his supposed role. Like his role has not always been very, very reliable. And he's not the preferred stacking option, and I'll get to that in a second. I think that kind of does it. I would keep an eye on some injury news here at wide receiver. I mentioned Jacoby Myers is such a good play. Just keep an eye on him because he was limited in practice. Jalen Waddle being out, that makes Tyreek Hill's ceiling look a lot better. I mean, he has not been good, and the matchup with the 49ers is obviously not great. One guy I would keep an eye on is going to be Malik Washington. They started getting him involved recently. Yeah, 6 targets, 5 catches last week. So he had 10 fantasy points. We started to see what he's capable of doing. Before that, he was more of just like a gadget guy, but now that Odell Beckham was released and now Jalen Waddle's out, Malik Washington is looking like one of the better values of the entire slate. Really like Malik Washington. Wan'Dale Robinson at 4.1K is another interesting cheap guy coming in with a projection over 11 fantasy points. He's really cheap. I don't hate it. Browns guys, Cedric Tillman, I think he's back. Just double checking. He's questionable. He's been missing time with a concussion. So if he's back at 4.9K, he is not the worst value guy. Elijah Moore at 4.8K is interesting if Tillman remains out. I just don't really trust the Cleveland passing game, as you can imagine. All right, so that is probably going to do it. Just keep an eye on injury news to see if anything else opens up. But over to tight end we go. Brock Bowers and Trey McBride are the top 2 studs. It's gonna be really hard to not work in one of these guys. I think right now my lean is definitely gonna be Trey McBride. It's not about talent or upside. That all resides with Brock Bowers for sure. And obviously, if Aiden O'Connell is in fact back in the lineup, I think he gets a boost. Because he'll have a guy who's like actually pretty decent under center compared to like Desmond Ridder. So the problem with Brock Bowers is he's been pretty erratic. He had 7, 33, and then 8 and 6 fantasy points in his last 4 games. So massive, massive ceiling. He can go out there and get 30 fantasy points, and he's facing the Jaguars, who are a beatable matchup for sure. The Jaguars have been really bad against the pass, not necessarily against tight ends lately. They've actually been top 10 against the position over the last 4 weeks, but on the year they've been bottom 10. So take what you will out of that. I think the point is he is expensive for a reason. He's got the best projection in the slate. Massive upside. So I do not mind using him. The problem is I do prefer Trey McBride because he's $300 cheaper and he's just got a more reliable role. Kyler Murray is just pushing targets his way, 10 plus targets in each of the last 4 games. So even when he doesn't score touchdowns, he is crushing 14 plus fantasy points in each of those games. And Kyler just went on record on social media saying that we can expect a Trey McBride touchdown soon. Yeah, seriously, he's scored 1 touchdown on the year. So I like it when we see those things in social media because I don't really think they're lying. I think he feeds them all game, so naturally he's going to be like, okay, why don't I feed him when we get close to scoring? So I really like Trey McBride. He's probably my top overall spend at tight end. Probably my favorite overall play, but we certainly want to take a shot on some of the value guys too. I think Kyle Pitts is a worthwhile try at 4K flat just with the quarterback change. You never know what's going to happen there. Brenton Strange had a just crazy amount of targets last week. Evan Ingram remains out, and he's really cheap. Let's see here. Where is he? Yeah. Worth noting he is limited with a shoulder injury, so keep an eye on his status. But he had 11 catches on 12 targets last week. He's actually a pretty good athlete too. So if he keeps getting a role like that, like the way they have fed Ingram in the past, I really like him at 3.5K, just too cheap. Sam Laporte at 4.7K. The Bears are not good against tight ends. That's a value for a guy who's starting to heat up in a really good offense. 21 fantasy points last week against the Bills, 10 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. So he's starting to get it going a little bit. But truth be told, at tight end, I really find it hard to not pay for Brock or Trey McBride because those guys just have insane ceilings. And I think we can go double tight end here. I don't think I'll go double tight end with Brock and Trey, although that is on the table. I think I would probably pick one and then slide in Brenton Strange, provided Brenton Strange is actually playing. All right, over to defense. Like I always say, it's a bit of a crapshoot. The Bengals come in with the best projection and the most ownership. That feels weird because they're like the worst defense in the league. But they are facing a guy who is not proven to be an effective NFL quarterback. So you certainly can try them. It feels really bad to pay 3.3K for the Bengals defense, though. That feels wrong, right? I'm sure you agree. Bills defense at 3.6. That looks good. Lions against the Bears at 3.4K. I'm sure they're going to be getting ready to bounce back in a big way. I think the Lions are probably my favorite spend up defense on this slate. But you know me, if you watch regularly, I like to punt defense. So I'm looking to, just way down low. I don't really want to do the Patriots necessarily or the Bears. I don't trust them against the Bills and Lions. I don't want to go that far. But I think the Panthers at 2.6K are an interesting leverage on some of the ownership for Arizona. Same case. Giants are facing a young rookie quarterback. I don't think that's the worst try in the world. Titans defense to leverage the Anthony Richardson ownership in lineups where you're not playing Anthony Richardson. I think that's the totally fair game. 49ers defense at home, or no, it's not at home, but against the Miami offense that is without one of their better weapons. And Jaguars defense against the Raiders, who, I mean, it's Aiden O'Connell. It's Aiden O'Connell. Like, that can definitely go bad. Point is, find one you like and go cheap at defense for the most part. But if you have to pay up, I think the Lions look pretty good. All right, that does it for the position by position breakdown. Quick recap here. I am very, very high on going low and cheap at quarterback. There are like 5 or 6 guys that I detailed that I like quite a bit. I think I'm mostly going Anthony Richardson or Michael Penix, though. I want to save quite a bit at that position. And I think a lot of these value guys have pretty good floors and considerable ceilings. I do not mind spending up and eating the chalk with Jahmyr Gibbs. But at the second running back slot, I would probably prefer to either get a value or go get a spend up that is not super chalky. I don't mind playing Chase Brown there in the second slot, but I just don't really want to go double chalk at running back if I don't have to. And at wide receiver, I think there's a lot of good value there for sure, like Malik Washington. The mid-range is where I really want to live at wide receiver with Malik Neighbors, Drake London, Brian Thomas Jr., and then there's Devontae Adams, who's $7K, like $1,000 cheaper than all these studs. If I have to play a stud on this slate, I think it's going to be Puka Nacua. And of course, we just talked about tight end. Love Brenton Strange as a value, but mostly I really like those top two spends. All right, we went a little bit over 30 minutes here, but hopefully this helps you out. Hopefully it provides a little bit of value and insight as you get into your building process for the weekend. If it does, smash that like button and also subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more videos just like this. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.